Hello students, today we will do biodiversity and conservation video 6. This is the 6th video on biodiversity and conservation, and topic of today is how to conserve biodiversity for class 12. So let's get started. There are two approaches of biodiversity conservation. Number one is in situ conservation and number two is ex situ conservation. The examples of in situ conservation are biosphere reserves, national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, and sacred forests. Whereas examples of ex situ conservation are botanical gardens, zoos, seed and pollen banks, gene banks, and tissue culture. So now let us look at the definition of in situ and ex situ conservation. You should remember that in situ conservation, we protect the endangered species of plant and animals in the natural habitat by protecting the habitat itself. So in situ conservation, we protect the entire habitat for protecting the plants and animals. For example, national parks and biosphere reserves. Whereas in ex situ conservation, we take out the animals and plants, we remove the animals and plants from their unsafe or threatened habitat and place them in special settings where they can be protected. For example, in zoos and botanical gardens. So, in situ conservation, entire habitat is protected, whereas in ex situ conservation, the animals and plants are removed from their natural habitat and placed in special settings. For example, in botanical garden and zoos. Now, under in situ conservation, we identify certain biodiversity hotspots. Now, what are biodiversity hotspots? Biodiversity hotspots, they are the areas where there is high level of species richness and high degree of endemism. Endemism means species found in that area is not found anywhere else. So what are biodiversity hotspots? They are the areas where there is high level of species richness and high degree of endemism. The species found in the area cannot be found anywhere else. So those are biodiversity hotspots. Now there are 34 hotspots in the world and 3 in India. So total 34 hotspots in the world means the areas where there is high level of species richness. There are 34 in the whole world and 3 in India. Example of biodiversity hotspots are Western Ghats and Himalayas. And there are 90 national parks and 448 wildlife sanctuaries in India. So you have to remember, what are biodiversity hotspots? They are the areas where there is high level of species richness and high degree of endemism. There are 34 hotspots in the world and 3 in India. Examples of biodiversity hotspots are Western Ghats and Himalayas. And there are 90 national parks and 448 sanctuaries in India. Now, one has to remember that botanical garden and zoos, they are conventional techniques of ex situ conservation. So, conventional methods of ex situ conservation are botanical garden and zoos. Now, there are 4 different new methods of biodiversity conservation. So, what are these 4 new methods of biodiversity conservation under ex situ conservation? Number one is seed bank. Seed bank is the area where genetic strains of commercially important plants are kept. In second method, what we do is that we preserve the gamete of threatened species of animals by cryopreservation technique, means keeping them in cold condition. We preserve the gametes of threatened species of animals. Now these gametes of threatened species of animals, they can be used to get fertilized eggs in vitro in vitro, means we can use these gametes of threatened species of animal for fertilizing egg in vitro outside the animal body. And the last technique is micropropagation and tissue culture, which help in raising the threatened species of plant in large number. So the 4 new techniques of biodiversity conservation under ex situ conservation is seed banks. Number 2, gametes of threatened plants and animals, they can be preserved by cryopreservation technique. Number 3, micropropagation and tissue culture. And number 4, eggs can be fertilized In vitro by using gamete from cryopreservation. Seed bank, gene bank, and tissue culture. So according to the text, the question time is how many national parks and wildlife sanctuaries are there in India? So we know that there are 90 national parks and 448 wildlife sanctuaries in India. The second question asks is why have Western Ghats in India been declared as biological hotspots? So Western Ghats in India has been declared as biological hotspot because it has high level of species richness and high level of endemism. Third question is why are certain regions of the earth called hotspots? Name any two hotspots in India. So certain areas in the earth are called hotspots because they have high level of species richness and high level of endemism. And examples of two hotspots in India are Western Ghats and Himalayas. Now, the fourth question asks is ex situ conservation has advanced beyond keeping threatened species in enclosure. Describe any three of them. So, here you have to describe four new techniques of ex situ conservation. So, these four new techniques of ex situ conservation would be described here. Now, write the importance of cryopreservation in conservation of biodiversity. So we know that cryopreservation helps in the preservation of gametes of threatened plants and animals. So the gametes of threatened plants and animals can be preserved by cryopreservation technique. That is its importance. So if you have learned something from this video, please subscribe now to my channel Ramji Chopra. Thank you.